With that, I want to introduce Tim Stratton to you. Tim has been a longtime friend of mine. As you know, I've been here a long time. And Tim's one of the first guys I met, which means, even though he doesn't look like it, he's kind of like as old as I am, right? Almost. Yeah, he's chasing me. So I'm so excited. We've been talking about the resurrection. And in the midst of all of that, we have evidence from the Bible. We've talked about that. We have evidence from other writers. We have evidence from people who actually saw it and lived it. But Tim brings something that I don't think a lot of us would really think about. And that is, how do we argue it? How do we talk about it and actually see the evidence and use that to share the gospel? And so that's what I invited Tim here tonight. I love Tim a lot, so you guys please respect him. Treat him like you would me, right? Maybe better than that, okay? And I'm going to let him have it. I don't think you need the mic.
All right.
So we're going to lose Mike, and you're going to talk about your website.
Sounds
right?
Good. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Kevin.
Give him a hand.
Oh, thank you, guys. Well, thank you for having me here tonight. We're on Facebook Live, right?
Yeah.
Well, hi, everybody out there in Facebook world. It's good to have you guys here joining us also. Packed out room. And, you know, as Kevin said, my name is Tim Stratton. I work for an organization called Freethinking Ministries. I was a youth pastor here in town for a decade. And you know what? I realized that people your age ask some really good questions. And so many people, so many middle schoolers and high schoolers and college students were asking so many good questions, asking me questions about, big, deep questions like, can we trust the Bible? How do we know that God exists? Is that something we just have to take on faith? Am I a Christian only because I'm raised in Kearney, Nebraska by Christian parents because I'm forced to go to church? How do I know that Christianity is true and not Islam or Buddhism or Hinduism or some other belief? How do I know atheism is not true? And you know what? I didn't know how to answer these questions. When teenagers were asking me these questions, I didn't know how to answer them. A lot of times I would just say, well, the Bible says it, so just believe it. And they'll say, like, yeah, but why should I believe what the Bible says? And I would say, well, because it's the Word of God. And they'll say, yeah, but why should I think that? And I would say, well, because it says right there. Paul tells Timothy that the Bible is the inspired Word of God. And they're like, yeah, but why should I believe it? And I would say, because it's in the inspired Word of God. Does that argument make sense to you guys?
No.
You know what they call that? Circular reasoning. Man, that's good. You guys are smart. Circular reasoning. And that's not a good reason at all. And so I started wondering, man, do we have good reasons to believe that Christianity is true? And I started seeing so many young people who had good questions raised, not getting their questions answered, and then they'd leave the church. And I even saw some of them become atheists, just lose their faith altogether. So I felt like God was telling me, Tim, if you're going to be a shepherd, you need to learn how to defend the sheep, and you need to learn right now how to answer some questions. And I soon realized that most pastors weren't equipped to answer these questions. Most people in general. In fact, when pastors go to seminary, very few of them ever take a class on how to answer these questions. Questions having to do with science and things like that. And so I went on a journey for several years to try to find as many questions to these answers as I could find. Jeremiah, he went through this with me, right? When you were a little kid when I started this journey. And so he got to see, and I took him with me through some of this stuff. And so it was really pretty cool. And now, I'm not a youth pastor anymore, but I go around talking to youth groups like I'm doing tonight, and churches in general. And I try to equip Christians of all ages to know why Christianity is true. And to know that we have really good reasons. Science is on our side. The historical method is on our side. We're going to talk about that tonight. The philosophy and logic is on our side. Big words that you'll probably never hear again, like metaphysics and epistemology. That's all on our side too. Guess what, guys? I'm here to tell you that Christianity is true, and we can know it's true because we have evidence. And it's not something you just have to believe by faith alone. In fact, we have a reasonable faith. Christianity is a reasonable faith, not a blind faith. Now, I've devoted my life to answering questions. Now, I work for an organization called Freethinking Ministries. Here's a site right here. It's freethinkingministries.com. Based right here in Kearney, Nebraska, but we have contributors from around the world, actually, on the website. Here's some of my colleagues here. That guy's from South Africa right there. Go ahead and scroll down. You can see some of here's the latest articles. We've got, see, I got one on the Avengers here. How many people have seen the Avengers? You like that movie, right? Well, yeah, you probably like that article. But so this is Freethinking Ministries. I encourage you guys, if you ever have questions, to go on the website. Who wants some Freethinking Ministries swag, huh? Who would wear a hat? Anybody want a hat?
I don't even
All right. Some might be a little, I don't know if they'll fit, but you can try them out. If they don't fit you, you can sell them to somebody else. Right? All right. So just really quickly, how many of you would like to have some evidence for your faith? How many would like to hear just a little bit more? How many of you have ever heard things like, well, doesn't science contradict God? Anybody ever heard anything like that? Right? Well, that's just really pretty ignorant when you hear things like that. I mean, consider this. Did you know that all the scientific data today tells us that the universe, the space-time universe, and all nature began to exist? Did you guys know that? I mean, from Big Bang cosmology to the second law of thermodynamics and entropy to this other big thing called the Borg-Guth-Vilenkin theorem of 2003, all of this scientific evidence goes to show that the universe, the space-time universe, all nature began to exist. Isn't that crazy? Well, guess what? If everything that begins to exist has a cause, and that's what science is all about, studying cause and effect relationships. If everything that begins to exist has a cause, and science tells us that nature began to exist, well, guess what? Can the cause of nature, if we're going to think logically, can the cause of nature be nature? Can the cause of all nature, everything nature, be nature itself? No, that's incoherent. That's like, yeah, nature existed before nature existed. What? That's logically incoherent. So it logically follows that the cause of nature has to be other than nature. You know what philosophers call that? Supernatural. So right off the bat, thinking logically about scientific data, we know that the cause of the natural universe has to be supernatural. Well, guess what? There's more. We're talking about the space-time universe. Well, if time began to exist, then the cause of time has to be timeless. Because you can't say, well, whatever caused the clocks to start ticking was in a state where the clock was ticking. No, that doesn't make any sense. So the cause of time has to be timeless. But guess what? If it's timeless, then that means that nothing could cause it to begin existing. Because beginnings require time. So whatever caused time to start ticking could not have had a cause of its own and never came into existence. You know what philosophers would call that? Eternal without beginning. So we have a supernatural, eternal cause of the space-time universe just by thinking logically about scientific data. Well, guess what? If space-time universe began to exist, if space began to exist, then the cause of space has to be spaceless. Because you can't say, space existed before space existed. Or space existed before all space exists. No, that doesn't make any sense. So the cause of space has to be spaceless. And that means it can't be made of matter because matter requires space to exist. You know what philosophers might call something that exists that's not made of matter? It would be an immaterial thing, or you could call it a spirit type of thing. Hey, look, have I touched this Bible yet? No, so far I'm just thinking logically about scientific data. And we've got a supernatural, timeless, beginningless, eternal, spaceless, immaterial cause and creator of the universe. Well, guess what? Whatever caused the universe to begin existing has to be enormously powerful. I can't think of anything that requires more power than causing an entire universe to come into existence from nothing. Can you? I can't. So it's got to be enormously powerful, whatever it is. And it's also got to have free will. Because apart from time, things aren't happening. There's no falling dominoes that are going to cause something else to happen. So nothing is going to happen if things aren't happening unless the cause of the universe can make a choice, a free will choice. Well, guess what? Persons are the only types of things that could possibly have free will. So the cause of the universe is a personal being. Now, again, I haven't touched this Bible, have I? I'm just thinking logically about science, but I'm not touching the Bible. But guess what? That is what the Bible tells us. I'm going to touch it now. Because the Bible tells us the same thing. Not that it's... well, guess what? Well, let me tell you more. Raise your hand if you're a person. Raise your hand if you're a personal being. Right? I think every... Oh, okay, you're a holdout, but you finally agreed you're a person. Okay, well, guess what? If you're a personal being, and I've logically concluded just by thinking logically about scientific data that the cosmic creator of the universe is a personal being, and if you're a personal being, then it follows that it's at least possible for you to have a personal relationship with the cosmic creator of the universe. I'm not opening that Bible to make that claim. I'm thinking logically about science. That's all. It's called doing metaphysics. Thinking logically about science. And the Bible does tell us the same thing. Not that it's just, or more than it's just possible for you to have a personal relationship with the cosmic creator of the universe, but it tells you how to have a personal relationship with the cosmic creator of the universe through Jesus Christ. Now the question is raised, well, why should I trust the Bible? Well, we've just looked logically at scientific data that comes to many of the same conclusions the Bible gives you. So you have logical and scientific reasons to actually give it a shot. But I want to tell you, we've also got historical evidence that Christianity in particular is true. That is to say, Christianity is a rational belief. Christianity is rational. Have you ever heard such a thing before? I bet some of you have heard that it's irrational to believe in Christianity. It's just nothing but a fairy tale, I'm sure some of you have heard. Well, guess what? Fairy tales don't have evidence showing that they're probably true. Christianity has evidence showing that it is probably true. We have good reason. And this is based on historical facts. So tonight I'm going to give you 5 historical facts that are going to be used to show that Christianity is probably true. For Christianity to be true, you need 2 things. 1, the existence of God. And by the way, I just showed you, thinking logically about scientific data, that this thing we call God, the cosmic creator of the universe, exists. Okay, so we have good reason to think that God exists. And I did that in a really quick flyover way, right? Got lots more evidence and many more arguments I could make for the existence of God. Go to the website, check it out. But you need 2 things to be true, or really 1 statement to be true. If this 1 statement is true, then Christianity is true. That 1 statement is this: God raised Jesus from the dead. Everybody say that with me. God raised Jesus from the dead. One more time.
God raised Jesus from the dead.
Right? Christians like to argue with other Christians. I do it all the time. Right? I love to argue with my brothers and sisters in Christ about a whole bunch of things. Okay? But guess what? The one thing that we all come together on and agree is that God raised Jesus from the dead. And this is what grounds what C.S. Lewis, the guy that wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, like Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, that same guy called this mere Christianity. Is God raised Jesus from the dead? If we can agree on that, then that's mere Christianity. And so if I can demonstrate that God exists and that it's true that God raised Jesus from the dead, then guess what? Some flavor of Christianity has got to be true. That's what I always say. We can argue about all these peripheral details, but some flavor of Christianity is going to be true. Now I'm going to show you that tonight by looking at 5 historical facts. The first one is that Jesus died by crucifixion. This is agreed to by the vast majority of historians. Now somebody might say, you'll hear it, I spent a lot of time on the UNK college campus, you'll hear this a lot. They'll say, well, wait a second, hold on, Tim. Why should I believe your so-called facts? We don't even know if Jesus even existed. We don't even know if Jesus was a real person. He could be just as real as the Easter Bunny. Well, is that true? Well, yeah. I mean, I don't have any arguments for the Easter Bunny, sorry. But is it true, should we think, that Jesus is on the same level as the Easter Bunny?
No.
No, I'll tell you what. The 5 facts I'm going to share with you tonight are backed up by so much historical evidence that the vast majority of professional historians and scholars related to this field, who study this subject every single day, who make their living doing historical research, the vast majority of these people, these PhD scholars and academics, will tell you that these 5 historical facts are things that really happened in history, in human history. Right? They're real events of the past. And I'm not just talking about Christians who say they're true. When I say the vast majority of scholars and academics, I'm also talking about atheists and agnostics and people from other religions that are professional historians. And all of these people together, the vast majority of them, will tell you that these are the historical facts. Things that we can know with extremely high degrees of historical certainty about the person, the real person of history, Jesus of Nazareth. These are the 5 facts. I'm going to go through them one by one. Again, although many in this group of professional historians I'm talking about, many of them doubt the existence of God, and thus they would doubt the resurrection, they do affirm and agree that Jesus was a real person of history and that we can know a few things about him. In fact, probably one historian that argues the most against Christianity today is a guy named Bart Ehrman. He's a professor at North Carolina University. And Bart Ehrman is clear. Hey, everybody, even all my atheist friends, he'll say, Jesus was a real person of history. There's no way around it. Okay, so when he hears people say, oh, there's no evidence that Jesus existed, he says, I write books about it. Jesus was a real man. He doesn't think he was God or the Son of God or the Messiah or anything like that. But Bart Ehrman will tell you, Jesus was a real person, and we can know a few things about him. Quite a bit of things about him, actually. So, again, the first fact you need to know that these scholars agree to is that Jesus was a real person of human history who died by crucifixion at the hands of the Roman government on a cross. Okay? That's not disputed. Let's move on to the next fact. Fact number 2. Jesus' disciples were convinced that Jesus rose from the dead and appeared to them. Now, I got to tell you, these skeptical scholars, these atheistic scholars, right? These historians, they're not affirming that Jesus actually rose from the dead and appeared to the disciples. But what they're saying is this. The disciples were extremely convinced. The disciples were convinced that Jesus did rise from the dead, even though these academics don't think Jesus actually rose from the dead. Are you tracking with me? They're not saying that Jesus did rise, but they're saying the disciples sure thought he did. And in fact, those disciples were willing to die for that belief. All right, let's go to the third fact. The conversion of Paul, or Saul, right? Saul of Tarsus, also known as Paul, this is a historical fact, was a sworn enemy of the early Christian church. He was persecuting Christians. He was arresting Christians. He was having them executed. And then all of a sudden, for some strange reason, Paul joined the side he was persecuting. Paul's like, I'm going to kill you guys. I'm going to kill you. I'm killing you. Oh, now I'm going to join you and let others try to kill me. All right? That's a historical fact. Saul of Tarsus, also known as Paul, a sworn enemy of the early Christians, suddenly became a Christian himself. And Paul was willing to die, and did die, for his Christian beliefs. Fact number 4. Jesus' skeptical brother, James, also became a Christian who was willing to die for the Christian message. Did you guys know that Jesus had a brother?
Yeah.
Right? James was his brother. Now, how many of you have brothers or sisters, a sibling, right? Most of you. How many of you would believe your brother or sister was the son of God if somebody told you that? How many of you would believe that? Of course you wouldn't believe it. Well, James was in the same boat. He was very skeptical. That's a historical fact. James did not believe Jesus was the Son of God until after Jesus was crucified. After that, he was willing to die for the belief that Jesus rose from the dead. Finally, fact number 5, Jesus' women followers found his tomb empty. Okay, the vast majority of scholars will agree to that too. So, these are some of the facts about Jesus. We've got more I could choose from, but I'm just going to hang out on these right now. Sometimes I just hang out on 3. Okay, but let's go through these. These are the historical facts about Jesus that the vast majority of historians agree to. So now we gotta do some detective work, right? We gotta put on our detective hats, and we're gonna think through the evidence. I have a friend who's one of the most famous detectives in the world right now. His name is J. Warner Wallace. He works for the LAPD, and he became famous for solving cold case homicide murders. That's kind of redundant. Cold case homicides, right? So when nobody else could solve these murders, they go to J. Warner Wallace and say, hey, can you help us out? And he solves the cases over and over again. He's always on NBC Nightline on that show. I think he's going to be on another one here coming up soon. But he's famous for cracking cold cases. And he also was an atheist who decided he's going to take his same methodology in solving crimes and apply them to the Gospels. And guess what? He became a Christian because he thought logically about the evidence and realized, wow, doing good detective work leads us to see that Christianity is probably true and worth putting your faith in. So check it out. Let's be detectives like J. Warner Wallace. And what we're going to do is we're going to try to come to the best explanation of all the facts and all the clues here. So we got to do some detective work. Otherwise, we have a big hole in human history. So like detectives, historians also engage in something called the historical method. And they try to connect all the dots so that we can know what probably happened. This is called the inference to the best explanation. Everybody say inference to the best explanation.
Inference to the best explanation.
This is what detectives do. It's what scientists do. Philosophers do this. Prosecuting attorneys do it. Scientists do it. And historians do it. It's inference to the best explanation. Does that mean that we're going to find out for sure with 100% certainty what happens or what happened? No, we're not trying to find stuff out with 100% certainty. We're trying to figure out what probably happened. Okay? What probably happened. So consider some possible explanations that are commonly offered in an attempt to make sense of all the historical facts. Right? Some people will say, they'll offer this. The conspiracy theory. And they'll say, hey.
Not the conspiracy theory.
No, not the conspiracy theory. They all lied. The big conspiracy, the most monumental prank of all time, the disciples punked the Pharisees, the disciples punked the Roman government, and the disciples been punking people for the last 2,000 years. Right? That's the conspiracy theory. They all lied about it. They somehow stole Jesus' dead body from the tomb and then started telling everyone that Jesus was alive. Big prank. Does that hypothesis stand up? What do you think?
No.
You're right about that. I say, nice try, conspiracy theorists. But historians, like detectives, rule out this hypothesis because it does not explain all the facts. It doesn't work. I mean, think about it. How do a few cowardly and spineless fishermen, cringing in fear for their lives, then decide to overcome a bunch of well-armed Roman commandos who were like the Navy SEALs of the day, and then roll away a 2-ton stone, steal a body, then hide it in a city full of Romans and Pharisees trying to find them, desperately trying to find that body? How are they going to do that? And more importantly, the bigger question is this: why would they do it? The disciples just saw the guy they were following get scourged, tortured, and crucified on a cross. And then they're going to do some stuff to get them hung on the same cross just like that? Why? Would you do it?
No.
I wouldn't. I'll tell you that much. So the disciples had nothing, absolutely nothing to gain by lying about Jesus' resurrection. In fact, they were persuaded and killed for telling people that Jesus was alive. Check it out. They were telling people that Jesus rose from the dead, willing to risk their lives. They just saw what happened to Jesus, and then they said, hey, we're going to put ourselves in the same boat and be willing to go through the same thing to tell people that he's alive. Would you do that if it was a lie? Would you do that just to punk a few people? Sure. People die for lies all the time. We saw it happen on 9/11. You guys are too young to remember that. But I remember it like yesterday. And on 9/11, Islamic terrorists sacrificed their lives. They flew those airplanes into the towers, and they died for a lie, right? They were told that they're going to wake up on the other side of death with like 72 virgins, in paradise. Guess what? That was a lie. But you know what? They thought it was true. People don't die for lies that they know are lies. The only time people die for lies is when they really think those lies are true. The disciples, however, were there firsthand. They were in a position to know if this was true or not. So this conspiracy theory fails. We need a better explanation. All right, let's try another one. How about this? This is probably the most common one I hear when I'm talking to other, to skeptics on the college campus or online on social media. I get this. The hallucination theory.
Drugs.
They were stoned, man. They were tripping on something. No, you know what? The hallucination theory says that the disciples, they just thought they saw Jesus after his execution, but it was just wishful thinking. Just wishful thinking. They really wanted it to be true, but they didn't really see him. They just all hallucinated. But historians, like detectives, could rule this theory out too because it lacks explanatory power. And why in the world would Paul, the enemy of Christianity, have the same hallucination? He didn't want it to be true. You can't explain Paul. I mean, there's so many things you can't explain with this. Yet this is the most common hypothesis offered in place of the resurrection by academic scholars who don't want Christianity to be true.
No, they're not drugs.
Yeah, they're on something. Right? So Paul reports that 500 witnesses saw Jesus at the same time. And then it even says that these witnesses are still alive and that the readers of his letters can go ask him for themselves if they don't believe him. He's saying, they're still alive. Go ask them for yourself, man. Right? I mean, that's pretty powerful. I mean, the people that he was writing to in that day were, obviously the people aren't alive right now for us, but the people that he sent that letter to was during the same time when they were still alive. He said, go ask them. They saw it. Over 500 people, along with the disciples, and along with me, he says. And I didn't want it to be true. I was killing these people. But I saw it with my own eyes. And he's willing to die for that. It's also reported that the disciples believed that they actually touched Jesus. And psychologists have demonstrated that hallucinations don't work like that. More importantly, hallucinations are like dreams. They're not the types of things that you can really share. I mean, Mike Lacona, a historian, offers an illustration. He's like, so imagine I'm sleeping and I'm having this great dream about a vacation that my wife and I are having in Hawaii. All these awesome details, and I wake up and I was like, oh man, what a great dream. It was like it was really happening. And so then he wakes up his wife and he says, hey honey, wake up. I got to tell you about this awesome vacation that I was dreaming about. And she's like, oh, why'd you wake me up? I was having the same dream. I'm like, wait, it can't be the same dream. I mean, did we do this? And then we go surfing with the dolphins, and then yeah, we did that. And then we do, dance some hula moves, and then eat some pineapples. Yeah, we did all the details were the same. And then Mike's like, well, hey, let's both go back to sleep and get a free vacation out of the deal. Dreams don't work like that, do they? And neither do hallucinations. So it's not a good hypothesis. It doesn't make sense of all the facts. Now, I got to tell you, there's many others that I'm not going to write up here on the board, but I've heard them all. I've heard, no, Jesus didn't really rise from the dead. Jesus just had a twin brother. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Guess what? That's not going to make sense of all these facts. Then I've heard, oh, well, Jesus didn't really die on the cross. He was just mostly dead, and then he revived in the coolness of the tomb. Yeah, like that makes a lot of sense. If that's how it worked, then we wouldn't need hospitals today. Just throw people in cool tombs. They'll be fine in 3 days. Okay? Doesn't work like that. I've also heard, no, Jesus wasn't really resurrected from the dead. He was abducted by aliens. Yeah, that's the tip. No, seriously. These are real explanations offered by people who don't want Christianity to be true. Many attempts have been made, but none of them can account for all of these facts, except for one. Guess what that is? The resurrection theory. That's the only theory, the only hypothesis that can make sense of all 5 of these facts and others that I haven't listed. It's the only one that can make sense of all the facts, the resurrection theory. That is to say, the hypothesis that God raised Jesus from the dead makes sense of all the data and all the facts. And now one might say, well, yeah, but wait. You're assuming that God exists to be able to say that God raised Jesus from the dead. Do you remember how I started this talk out? And just like 5 minutes or less, I gave you evidence for the existence of God. So if that same cause and creator of the universe exists, would it be hard for the creator of the universe to raise a person in the universe back to life? No, in fact, if God can create a universe from nothing, raising a man from the dead would be child's play, wouldn't it? Wouldn't be hard at all. But people say, no, wait. Dead people stay dead. Dead people don't rise. We see this every day. Dead people stay dead. And rising from the dead would be a supernatural event, a miracle. And science has proven that miracles don't happen. Have you ever heard something like that? Anybody? Science has proven that miracles don't happen. Really? What scientific evidence are you referring to? What scientific experiment are you referring to that has proven that miracles don't happen? It doesn't work like that. Maybe some of you know my son. He's a freshman at Kearney High right now. His name's Ethan. And, he's on the wrestling team and ran cross country. But, yeah, he's my son. Ethan Lawrence. He's in your PE class? Good. So, Ethan, earlier this year, was kind of cornered by a few upperclassmen who asked him, hey, you don't think God exists, do you? And Ethan was like, he's not like this outspoken guy. But he's like, yeah, I'm a Christian. So what are you going to do? And they're like, oh, you're so dumb. Science has proven that God doesn't exist. Ethan, I try not to shove this stuff down his throat. Stuff I work on every single day. He knows what I do. But You know, I realized right away if he's trying to shove this stuff down people's throat, they don't want it. But he's aware of it. And so when these upperclassmen said, science has proven God doesn't exist, Ethan said, what scientific evidence are you referring to? What scientific experiment has proven that God doesn't exist? You know what they said? The Big Bang. Big Bang. And Ethan's like, you need to do a little more reading because the Big Bang, if it's true, is the ultimate evidence we have for the existence of God. It validates Genesis 1:1. It validates the idea that God created everything ex nihilo from nothing. Scientific data is on our side. But people constantly will say things like this. When people say things like that, ask them, what evidence are you referring to? And keep asking them questions. Make them unpack their claims. Well, here's the thing. Science has not disproved the existence of God, nor has science disproved miracles. In fact, that would be impossible. Science deals exclusively with the study of nature. A scientist is one who studies nature and only nature. Guess what? If God exists, he's the creator of all nature. So, by definition, can the creator of all nature be studied by a scientist, since scientists only study nature? No. They're in the wrong field. If anybody says, well, I'm a scientist, and so let me tell you that because of science, God doesn't exist. No. You might as well ask a plumber what they think, because a scientist is just in the wrong field. Nothing against plumbers and nothing against scientists either. Plumbers are really smart. I don't know how to operate those pipes underneath my sink. But just because a plumber knows how to fix the pipes underneath my sink doesn't mean they have any special authority or expertise to tell you about the existence or non-existence of God. A scientist is in the same boat as the plumber. They study nature. And if God exists, he's something other than nature, supernatural. And so they have no idea if a supernatural being exists or not based on science. They can have opinions, but not expert opinions. It's not their field. And let me tell you this. If a supernatural being exists, well, a supernatural being does supernatural things. And those are what we call miracles. It's not that big a deal. Science studies nature, like physics and chemistry, but a miracle, by definition, is not a natural event. All right, so anyway, it's logically impossible for a scientist to throw out any hypothesis that lies outside the boundaries of science. The facts remain that the resurrection of Jesus is the only hypothesis that can explain all the data. I'm going to wrap up. So, if you have 5 facts, this is what the inference to the best explanation comes in. It's called abductive reasoning. I'm going to start ending with this. When we do the inference to the best explanation, that means a rational person will hold the hypothesis that makes the most sense of all the facts and all the data. This is true in anything. This is what scientists do when they're trying to come to conclusions in the lab about nature. It's what detectives do. It's what lawyers do. It's what logicians do. I mean, so many people do this kind of thing. And it's what historians do. Now, if you've got 5 facts that need explained, and you've got a hypothesis that can make sense of 3 out of the 5 facts, that's pretty good, isn't it? What's better, a hypothesis that can make sense of 3 out of 5 facts, or a hypothesis that can only make sense of 1 out of 5 facts? What's better? 3, right? That's the inference to the best explanation if those are the only 2 options. But then what if a hypothesis comes along that can make sense of 4 of the 5 facts? Should that one be preferred over the one that can make sense of 3? Yeah. But then what happens if you only have 1 hypothesis that can make sense out of 5 out of 5 facts? What one are you going to pick? The 5 out of 5. Guess what? The resurrection hypothesis is the only one that can make sense of all the 5 facts. Therefore, a rational person will put their faith and what is probably true. The inference to the best explanation. By the way, what is faith? It's putting your trust in what you know is probably true. That's all faith is. Putting your trust in what you know is probably true. How many of you have ever gone up to somebody and said, hey, trust fall, catch me, and you fall backwards? Do you know, how many of you have done that? Raise your hand. Okay. Do you know with 100% certainty that they're going to catch you? No. Do you know they're probably going to catch you? Yeah. I wouldn't ask somebody to do that if I didn't think. How many of you have been on an airplane before? Raise your hand if you've been on an airplane. Did you know with 100% certainty that thing wasn't going to crash?
No.
Oh, you know it could crash, huh? Did you know it was probably going to get you there? Yeah, so you put your faith in that airplane and in those pilots. Faith is putting your trust in what you know is probably true. Guess what? Based on thinking logically about science and thinking about the historical method and historical facts, we know that Christianity is probably true, that God exists, and that it seems, making sense of all the evidence, God raised Jesus from the dead. Well, guess what? If that's true, then mere Christianity is true, and you should put your faith in what this book tells you, right? You should trust this book. I have intentionally not opened this book tonight. It's the book I base my life on, but I have not opened it tonight because I want you to see that we have good reason to open it. But when your pastors open it and preach out of it, you should listen. They're heroes because they're teaching out of this book, and I wanted you to see that I could show that this book, that we have good reason to believe it's true without opening it to just assume it's true. We have really good reason to think and believe that this is the inspired Word of God. I have a lot more I could say. I'm going to cut my talk short because I'm going way longer than I was planning on going. But I write about this stuff every week on the website. We do videos. Kevin's sat in a whole bunch of classes that I tell you can go to the videos and click on lectures. And I've got four videos on the historical evidence of the resurrection and so much more. Hey, and if you guys ever have questions, if we haven't answered them already on the website, you can click on contact and send me an email and ask me your question. And I'll put people from Kearney at the top of the list. I get questions from people around the world, even in the Middle East and Islamic countries right now, and atheists from Europe. I get questions from all over. I've made a commitment to my fellow Kearneyites, right? To my Bearcat friends. I will put you at the top of the list, right? When you guys send in questions. But man, I just want to leave with this. You have really good reason to live for Jesus. Not to just think it's true, but a rational person, if you think it's probably true, will live according to the teachings of Jesus. Will live according to his commands. Because it's probably true. You should live. I'll tell you this. That when I say probability, I just mean it's extremely probable, like 99.9999% certainty that it's true. It's so strong that I would say, I am willing to base my life on it. I am willing to die for Jesus because I know that he died for me. And if you find somebody that's willing to die, like the disciples and Paul did, when you find somebody that's willing to die for Christianity, you found somebody who's also willing to live it every day. And I want to encourage you guys to get in that same boat with me.